The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla stepped out onto the grand terrace. Her emerald green dress rustled softly in the gentle breeze, and her pearl necklace caught the early light. Today was different from her usual royal engagements. She had specifically requested to inspect the changing of the guard ceremony, something she had been planning for weeks. The Queen Consort had always felt a deep respect for the royal guard, those stoic soldiers who stood watch over the monarchy with unwavering dedication. Their red tunics and tall bearskin hats had become symbols of British tradition, recognized around the world. However, Camilla had noticed something during recent public appearances that troubled her deeply. During the previous month's state dinner, she had observed the guards maintaining their rigid positions while distinguished guests walked past. Not once had she seen them acknowledge her presence with the traditional salute that protocol demanded. The same thing happened during the garden party the week before, and again during the charity event at Windsor Castle. Each time, the guards remained motionless, their eyes fixed straight ahead, showing no recognition of her royal status. Captain James Morrison, the officer in charge of the Queen's Guard that morning, had been serving the crown for over 15 years. His military record was impeccable, decorated with honors from Afghanistan and Iraq. He commanded respect from his men through fair leadership and unwavering dedication to duty. When he received the message that Queen Camilla wished to personally inspect the guard, he felt both honored and slightly puzzled by the unusual request. The captain gathered his men in the early hours before dawn. 24 of the finest soldiers stood in perfect formation, their uniforms pressed to perfection, their boots polished to a mirror shine. Each man had undergone rigorous training, not just in military tactics, but in royal protocol. They knew every rule, every tradition, every gesture that their position required. As Queen Camilla approached the formation, her lady-in-waiting, Lady Sarah Richardson, walked discreetly behind her. Lady Sarah had served the royal family for over a decade and understood the intricate web of palace politics better than most. She had witnessed the subtle tensions that sometimes arose between different members of the royal household, particularly regarding matters of precedence and respect. The Queen Consort stopped directly in front of the assembled guard. Her heart was beating faster than usual, though she maintained her composed exterior. This moment represented something more significant than a simple inspection. For months, she had been working to establish her authority within the royal hierarchy, proving herself worthy of the crown she now wore. "Captain Morrison," she called out, her voice carrying across the courtyard with practiced authority. "I require your men to present arms and offer the royal salute." The captain stepped forward, his posture rigid with military precision. His eyes met the Queen's for a brief moment, and she could see something flickering behind his professional demeanor. It wasn't defiance exactly, but something that made her stomach tighten with uncertainty. "Your Majesty," Captain Morrison replied, his voice steady and respectful. "It would be my honor to have the guard acknowledge your presence." But as the words left his mouth, Camilla noticed something in his tone that didn't quite match his formal words. There was a subtle hesitation, a barely perceptible pause that made her wonder if everything was proceeding as she had expected. The morning air seemed to grow still as Captain Morrison turned to face his men. The 24 soldiers stood like statues, their expressions hidden beneath the shadow of their bearskin hats. Behind them, the palace walls rose majestically, witnesses to countless ceremonies and royal traditions spanning hundreds of years. Lady Sarah noticed the tension building in the scene. She had attended dozens of such military ceremonies, and something felt different about this one. The usual seamless flow of royal protocol seemed to have an undercurrent of uncertainty that she couldn't quite identify. Queen Camilla straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin slightly. She had come too far to back down now. Years of public scrutiny had taught her the importance of projecting confidence, even when she felt uncertain inside. The British press was always watching, always ready to pounce on any sign of weakness or confusion within the royal family. "Proceed, Captain," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority that came with her position as Queen Consort. Captain Morrison nodded formally and turned back to his assembled troops. The moment stretched out like a taut wire, filled with expectation and growing tension. The Queen's hands remained clasped in front of her, but Lady Sarah could see the slight tremor in her fingers that betrayed her inner nervousness. The guards remained perfectly still, their training evident in every controlled breath and measured stance. Years of discipline had taught them to follow orders without question, to maintain their positions regardless of external circumstances. They were the embodiment of British military tradition, representatives of an institution that had served the crown for centuries. As Captain Morrison opened his mouth to give the command, a flock of pigeons suddenly took flight from the palace roof, their wings creating a flutter of movement against the morning sky. The sound broke the silence momentarily, but the soldiers didn't flinch. Their focus remained absolute, their commitment to duty unwavering. Queen Camilla felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't just about receiving a salute from the royal guard. It was about establishing her place in the complex hierarchy of the monarchy, proving that she commanded the same respect as other members of the royal family. The success or failure of this moment would echo through the palace corridors and potentially influence how she was perceived by both the military and the public. The captain's voice rang out across the courtyard, clear and commanding, as he prepared to give the order that would determine how this unusual morning would unfold. Everything that followed would depend on how his carefully trained soldiers chose to respond to their queen consort's direct request for acknowledgement and respect. "Guard, present arms for Her Majesty Queen Camilla." Captain Morrison's command echoed across the courtyard with military precision. The response that followed was not what anyone expected. Instead of the synchronized movement of 24 rifles being raised in perfect unison, the guards remained completely motionless. Not a single soldier moved. Their weapons stayed firmly planted at their sides, their eyes fixed straight ahead, as if the captain's command had never been spoken. A heavy silence settled over the courtyard like a thick blanket. Queen Camilla felt her breath catch in her throat as she processed what had just happened. Her carefully planned moment of royal authority had crumbled in an instant. The color drained from her cheeks as she realized that the royal guard had collectively chosen not to acknowledge her command. Captain Morrison's face flushed red beneath his military cap. In 15 years of service, he had never experienced such a blatant display of disobedience from his troops. His jaw tightened as he struggled to maintain his composure while processing the unprecedented situation unfolding before him. Lady Sarah stepped closer to the queen consort, her diplomatic instincts kicking into high gear. She could see the mortification spreading across Camilla's face and knew that damage control would be essential. The implications of this moment could reverberate through the palace and potentially make headlines in the British press. "Perhaps the men didn't hear the command clearly, Captain," Lady Sarah suggested quietly, trying to provide an escape route for everyone involved. But Captain Morrison knew better. His soldiers had heard every word. Their training had made them acutely aware of every sound, every movement, every command given on the palace grounds. This wasn't a case of miscommunication or confusion. This was something far more serious. Queen Camilla's hands began to tremble slightly as she struggled to comprehend what was happening. In all her years of royal training, no one had prepared her for a situation like this. The protocols and procedures she had memorized seemed useless when faced with such an unexpected breakdown in military discipline. Sergeant Williams, the most senior enlisted man in the formation, kept his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the Queen's shoulder. He had served under 3 different monarchs and understood the weight of tradition better than most. His decision to remain motionless wasn't made lightly, but it was made with absolute conviction. The other guards followed his lead, their solidarity unbreakable despite the growing tension in the air. Each man had his own reasons for their collective response, but they were united in their quiet rebellion against what they perceived as an inappropriate demand. Captain Morrison cleared his throat and tried again, his voice carrying a note of desperation that he couldn't quite hide. "Guard! Attention for Her Majesty!" Again, the soldiers remained perfectly still. Their uniforms rustled slightly in the morning breeze, but not a single man altered his position or acknowledged the command. The silence grew more oppressive with each passing second. Queen Camilla felt heat rising in her cheeks as embarrassment washed over her. She had come here to assert her authority, to demand the respect she felt was her due as queen consort. Instead, she found herself facing what appeared to be a coordinated act of defiance from some of Britain's most elite soldiers. A small group of palace staff had gathered at a respectful distance, drawn by the unusual nature of the proceedings. Word had spread quietly through the servants' quarters that the queen consort was conducting an impromptu inspection of the guard. Now they found themselves witnesses to an unprecedented breach of royal protocol. Mrs. Margaret Foster, the head housekeeper who had worked at Buckingham Palace for over 30 years, watched the scene unfold with growing concern. She had seen many royal ceremonies and state occasions, but nothing had prepared her for this awkward standoff between the queen consort and the royal guard. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting shorter shadows across the courtyard as the uncomfortable situation continued. Queen Camilla realized that she had to make a decision. She could continue to demand compliance and risk further humiliation, or she could find a graceful way to retreat from this increasingly uncomfortable situation. Captain Morrison was sweating now, despite the cool morning air. His military career flashed before his eyes as he considered the potential consequences of his men's actions. Disobedience to the royal family was not taken lightly, and he knew that explanations would be demanded from his superiors. But as he looked at his soldiers, he began to understand something that hadn't been immediately apparent. This wasn't random insubordination or disrespect. His men were sending a message, and slowly, the meaning of that message began to crystallize in his mind. Sergeant Williams had served during the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. He had stood guard as millions of people paid their respects to a monarch who had earned the love and devotion of her people through 70 years of dedicated service. He had witnessed the genuine grief of a nation saying goodbye to their beloved queen. The other soldiers shared similar memories and experiences. They had served under a monarch whose authority was unquestioned, whose presence commanded immediate and genuine respect. The traditions they upheld weren't just empty ceremonies, but sacred duties that connected them to generations of guardsmen who had served before them. Queen Camilla began to suspect that this moment was about more than military protocol. She could see something in the soldiers' posture, a subtle but unmistakable communication that spoke to deeper issues within the royal hierarchy. The realization that their response might be rooted in loyalty to traditions and memories she couldn't fully understand made her feel even more isolated and uncertain. Lady Sarah moved closer to the queen consort and whispered urgently, "Your Majesty, perhaps we should withdraw and address this matter through proper channels." But Camilla wasn't ready to concede defeat. She had worked too hard to establish her position within the royal family to be dismissed so easily by a group of soldiers, no matter how elite their status might be. "Captain Morrison," she said, her voice gaining strength as her royal training took over, "I expect an explanation for this unprecedented display of insubordination." The captain straightened his shoulders and met her gaze directly. For the first time since the ceremony began, he seemed to find his footing. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of military tradition and unwavering conviction. Your Majesty, my men are responding according to the deepest traditions of the Royal Guard. They are honoring protocols that have guided our service for centuries. Queen Camilla frowned, not understanding the implications of his carefully chosen words. What protocols? I am the Queen Consort. I have the right to receive the royal salute from the Guard. Captain Morrison's expression remained respectful, but firm. Ma'am, with the greatest respect, there are certain traditions that supersede formal protocol. My men are responding to a higher calling. The courtyard fell silent again, as the weight of his words settled over everyone present. Queen Camilla realized that she was facing something more complex than simple military disobedience. This was about the very heart of royal tradition and the unwritten rules that governed the relationship between the monarchy and those who served it. Captain Morrison took a deep breath before continuing his explanation, knowing that his next words would either resolve the situation or make it significantly worse. The tension in the courtyard was thick enough to cut with a sword, and every person present seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what would come next. Your Majesty, he began carefully, the Royal Guard salute is traditionally reserved for the reigning monarch and those who have earned it through specific acts of service to the crown. While you are indeed the Queen Consort and deserve our utmost respect, the ceremonial salute you've requested follows different protocols than standard royal acknowledgement. Queen Camilla's face showed a mixture of confusion and growing understanding. She had assumed that her title automatically granted her all the ceremonial honors accorded to royalty, but apparently, the reality was more nuanced than she had realized. Sergeant Williams, still maintaining his rigid posture, knew the historical precedent that guided their response. During World War II, when King George VI requested a similar salute for Queen Elizabeth's mother, the Guard had responded with a modified acknowledgement rather than the full military honors reserved for the sovereign. The traditions they upheld weren't arbitrary rules, but carefully maintained customs that preserved the dignity and meaning of royal ceremonies. Lady Sarah quickly understood the delicate nature of the situation. As someone well-versed in royal protocol, she realized that Queen Camilla had inadvertently stepped into a complex area of ceremonial tradition. The embarrassment wasn't just about being denied a salute, but about revealing a gap in her understanding of the intricate customs that governed royal life. Captain, Lady Sarah interjected diplomatically, perhaps you could explain the appropriate form of acknowledgement that would be suitable for this occasion. Captain Morrison nodded gratefully for the opportunity to redirect the situation toward a more positive outcome. Indeed, my lady, the Royal Guard would be honored to present a formal acknowledgement of Her Majesty's presence and position. He turned back to his soldiers and issued a different command. Guard, present honors for Her Majesty Queen Camilla, Queen Consort of the United Kingdom. This time the response was immediate and impressive. All 24 soldiers moved in perfect synchronization, their movements crisp and precise. Instead of the full ceremonial salute that Camilla had originally demanded, they performed a modified honor guard presentation that was both respectful and appropriate to her position. The soldiers brought their rifles to a diagonal position across their chests, tilted their heads slightly forward in acknowledgement, and held the position for exactly 10 seconds before returning to attention. The movement was beautiful in its precision and dignity, a display of military excellence that honored both tradition and the Queen Consort's position. Queen Camilla felt a wave of relief wash over her as she watched the elegant ceremony unfold. While it wasn't exactly what she had originally envisioned, the modified salute carried its own sense of dignity and respect. More importantly, it resolved the awkward standoff that had threatened to become a public relations disaster. The palace staff members who had witnessed the unusual events began to disperse quietly, understanding that discretion would be essential in preventing gossip from spreading throughout the royal household. Mrs. Foster made mental notes about which servants had been present, already planning conversations about the importance of maintaining confidentiality regarding royal family matters. Captain Morrison felt the tension leaving his shoulders as the situation reached a satisfactory resolution. His men had upheld their traditions while still showing proper respect for the Queen Consort. The delicate balance between military protocol and royal hierarchy had been maintained without creating a diplomatic crisis. As the ceremony concluded, Queen Camilla found herself reflecting on the unexpected lesson she had just learned. Her assumption that royal titles automatically granted access to all ceremonial honors had been gently but firmly corrected. The experience was humbling, but also educational in ways that would serve her well in future royal engagements. Sergeant Williams and his fellow soldiers maintained their positions as the Queen Consort prepared to leave the courtyard. Their collective decision to initially refuse the inappropriate command had been vindicated by the successful resolution of the situation. They had protected the integrity of their traditions while still honoring their duty to the royal family. Lady Sarah walked beside Queen Camilla as they made their way back toward the palace entrance. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "this morning's events actually demonstrate the deep respect that the military has for royal traditions." Their initial response wasn't about disrespecting you personally, but about preserving the sacred nature of their ceremonial duties. Queen Camilla nodded slowly, beginning to understand the broader implications of what had transpired. "I see that there's still much for me to learn about the complexities of royal protocol." Captain Morrison approached the Queen Consort before she entered the palace. "Your Majesty, if I may, I would like to arrange a private briefing about military ceremonies and protocols. It would be my honor to ensure that future interactions between the Royal Guard and Your Majesty proceed smoothly." The offer was both practical and diplomatic, providing an opportunity for better communication while avoiding any suggestion that the morning's events had been anyone's fault. Queen Camilla accepted gratefully, recognizing the wisdom in learning more about the traditions she was expected to navigate. As the Royal Guard returned to their regular duties, the unusual morning began to take on a different meaning for everyone involved. What had started as an embarrassing confrontation had evolved into a valuable learning experience that actually strengthened the relationship between the Queen Consort and the military personnel who served her. Word of the morning's events would inevitably spread through palace channels, but the story that emerged would be one of mutual respect and successful resolution rather than conflict and embarrassment. Captain Morrison's diplomatic handling of the situation had transformed a potential crisis into a positive example of how tradition and innovation could coexist within the royal household. Queen Camilla spent the rest of the morning reflecting on her experience with the Royal Guard. The embarrassment she had initially felt gradually gave way to a deeper appreciation for the complexities of her role. She realized that earning the genuine respect of those who served the crown would require more than simply asserting her title. It would require understanding and honoring the traditions that made the monarchy meaningful. The following week, Captain Morrison conducted the promised briefing, and Queen Camilla proved to be an attentive and engaged student. Their professional relationship flourished as mutual understanding replaced the initial confusion and tension. Years later, Queen Camilla would look back on that morning as a turning point in her royal journey. The day she had demanded a salute and been gently taught about tradition had become the day she truly began to understand what it meant to serve the crown rather than simply wear it.